Hey, listeners, before we get into today's podcast, I just want to give a shout out to today's sponsor. And today's sponsor is Tiny and Sons Glass. Does your vehicle have cameras or driver's assist? If so, when your windshield is replaced, it will need to be recalibrated. What is recalibration? When your vehicle's windshield is replaced, the safety systems need to then be tested to ensure that they work with your new windshield. Some vehicles require static recalibration, and others require a dynamic recalibration. Not sure who to trust to take care of this recalibration for you? Well, just call Tiny & Sons Glass in Pembroke, Mass. They are experts in auto glass and registered company of the Auto Glass Safety Council. Plus, they make it easy. They will call your insurance company for you. Get your windshield replaced by their highly trained auto glass technicians and get your vehicle recalibrated so you can be back on the road. Tiny & Sons Glass, keeping you and your family safe. Today's second sponsor is Omio. Omio is a travel booking platform that makes planning a journey in Europe and North America effortless. Just enter your travel details and Omio will magically give you all of your train, bus, flight, and ferry options for your journey. It's never been simpler to book your first real vacation for 2021. Best of all, using Omio saves you time and money. That's a win-win in our books. Omio wants to help you leave your house this summer by offering 5% off your next booking. Just head over to omio.com, that's omio.com, and use the code OMIO5 at checkout. Valid until July 31st for New Year's on all modes of transportation. It's just the pick-me-up 2021 needs. Omio, plan, book, and love the journey. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back, Inebri-ites. This is Andy, the Inebri-art podcast, and I'm actually recording from home today because the Wi-Fi at the office has been less than good. But we're still using Zoom, and I think we're going to continue because we're getting some really cool guests, as always. And today we're joined by, now I have like approach anxiety about trying to pronounce your name because we were just talking about that. Mika Boorem.
I'd like to be called Mel, actually.
Mel Boorem. Thanks, thanks, Mika.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you having me on. This is fun.
Yeah, this is I really appreciate you coming on. I was really excited because I have to admit, and I'm going to ask how often this happens, and it's weird how sometimes when you remember someone from something specific, they never age in your brain. I remember when this was probably going like back 10 years, there was a hip hop group that was like little kids. I can't remember what they were called, but one of them passed away. I'm like, oh my God, that's so sad. They're like, he was 30. And I'm like, was he? And I feel like you're kind of the same way because I remember you from the Patriots. So when I saw your name kind of pop up in that reference, and then I'm like, oh, she's not a kid anymore. Do you kind of get people that kind of have that problem where they remember you from something specific and kind of you never age in their brain? Or is that just my
I don't know. That's a good one. What I do have happen a lot, which I think is very funny, is people will be like, we went to high school together. I'm like, no. And they're like, middle school. And I'm like, nah. I'm not from that area.
Oh, like they recognize you and they can't place.
They don't know. They're like convinced. They're like, yeah, like we had classes. I'm like, no, actually, like I do some acting stuff. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's funny because people will like get really far down that road of like, so maybe that's kind of like the same thing when they see the face and they're like, I remember you when you know what I mean? And they're just referencing their own youth with that.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
Younger, they're like, now you look old. Now you're old as hell, but I remember you when you were young. I don't know. But I can see that too, that like falling into place with that.
Yeah. But I was checking out your IMDb page. You've been in like everything, a ton of stuff. Obviously, you were very busy working, but you're also directing now too, right?
Yeah. So that's exciting. I just directed my first full-length feature film, Hollywood.com, and just released it on Amazon. So that's pretty fun. I'm excited about it. It's been a really cool experience. It was interesting with the pandemic because we had originally planned on releasing it in the theaters, and more specifically in the theaters in Mexico, because there's a lot of Latin America and like Spanish in the film. It's pretty much like kind of half North America and half South America, and half English and half Spanish. Probably maybe a little bit more English, but so we had, because it's an independent film, we get to make a lot of these choices ourselves, which is pretty cool. And so we were like, that would be fun. Like, let's, do this theatrical release and start it in Mexico instead of starting the United States first, because most people for theatrical releases will do US first or Canada first, and then they'll go to other territories and other countries. And so we had decided to do it in Mexico, and we'd actually done a press tour through Mexico, my dad and I, and then we were getting ready to release it in all of these theaters in Mexico. And then the pandemic hit, and we were like, oh, like, what should we do? Like, do we want to wait and hold on to it? And so we like waited around a while, and we're like, oh, like, I don't know when people are going to be back in theaters, like what's going to happen. And I talked to one of my friends who works in a big studio, and he was like, we have our, all of our big Marvel type movies that we're sitting on that haven't come out yet. As soon as theaters are at capacity, like that's what you'll be in competition with, So like, just like their press. Yeah. So just like, even though there's so many people that love independent films, but even though, just like with their press and advertising budgets, like it's going to be crazy. It's going to be, as soon as theaters open back up, it's going to be like huge movie after huge movie in them for a long time, because they've all just been hanging on to their movies. They haven't been releasing them at all. The only people that have released them are Warner Brothers, because they teamed up with HBO and they launched HBO Max. And they've decided to release theirs, which has been interesting because a lot of these actors take pay cuts on things, and then they take points on the back end. So that was like one of the things that came out with like Wonder Woman was they had all these actors that, if it makes so much money, then they get, at the box office, then they get more money, and like all these like bumps that are written into the contracts. So they had to bring out the lawyers and like renegotiate all of that. And so it's this, to release it on streaming is this sort of big like hoopla like thing that they have to do with figuring out like all the monetary side of it too, because it's not what the contracts were originally had like all of the different pieces worked out for. So yeah, so it's a I'm sorry, I just went a completely different direction.
Oh no, that's fine. I mean,
you're like, where are we?
No, honestly, it's really interesting. It's something I never really thought about, like how kind of screwed the actors can get. I mean, if you're a huge star, that's one thing. But I remember when Robert Downey Jr. signed for the Iron Man movie, the first one, like he wasn't nearly this, huge celebrity that he is now. And they say that the majority of the money that he made was from the back end of how successful the movies were. And that.
Yeah, so I think that they worked out some sort of negotiations where everybody's happy with it, from my understanding, with those films like the Wonder Woman and stuff. But it's definitely something that they had to negotiate, because it wasn't the original deal. So anyway, that being said, so we decided, we were like, okay, well, where should we release it? And then we decided on Amazon. So we've got the movie up on there now, which has been awesome. And I think over the pandemic too, everybody, at least a lot of my friends, everybody souped up their TV. So it's more like a theater in the houses. Yeah,
do you think that's going to be something that kind of affects theaters going forward, where, there are things that are being released on streaming that are just as good, if not better, than some of the movies out there, and everyone's TV quality is so much better? I mean, there's less reason to go to the theater. I mean,
I think it's an interesting thing. So there's actually a really interesting conversation that you can look up that Spielberg and George Lucas did. I believe they did it at USC, and they're talking about how they think in the future it's just going to be like these large, like $100 million, $50 million, or $300 million, whatever movies that are tentpole movies that would be the ones at the theaters. And then more specifically that like the prices will no longer be, well, I don't know, let's be real, like out here in California, like a lot of our tickets are already like $30. But what they were saying was like
For a movie ticket?
yeah, maybe not that much, but like, I don't know, like 18, 20,
Yeah.
25 for some of like the ones that have like the food and stuff.
Yeah.
But they predicted that it'll go up to like $50 a ticket, and it'll just be a few different large films that will be in there. I'm not entirely sure about that. I think it's kind of like a funny thing. I respect those filmmakers so much, but I do think it's kind of funny that they're the ones saying that, because who, like, okay, so if there were only a few filmmakers, only a few films, like theirs would probably be the ones.
Right. Yeah. They're like,
Yeah.
it's going to cost you $75 to see my movie.
And it'll just be me and one other filmmaker.
Yeah.
Which I love and adore them so much. But yeah, I thought that was kind of, I was like, that's a little bit interesting because it would definitely be in their favor. But yeah, so I think though that it's like a cultural, I think it's like a cultural like outing, you know, it's an experience. I talked to one of my good friends the other day, and she went with her husband and her little kids and the in-laws and her parents, and they all went to see the new Cruella movie.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, I think that like what other kind of outing can you do where you can take that big of a group and like go as a family together and do something? I think that the you know, films and like going to a theater really lends well to that. And that's much more interesting than if those like 10 people had gotten together at somebody's house and like watched it. You know, it wouldn't have been an event, you know?
Yeah. And it's interesting. Recently I went to, and this has a huge resurgence because of COVID, but I went to the drive-in, and we had made plans to go see Goonies. So it's like,
Fun!
the movie's going to be great. And so like, invited her daughter and her daughter's friend along so they could go off and play. And there was like yard games, and you could get a beer, and the food was really great. And it was like this whole event, and they had trivia and all sorts of things. And it became like a whole, not quite a day, but a whole evening instead of just, let's go to dinner and then a movie. It was like, let's go to the drive-in and we'll play yard games, and it'll be, a whole thing. And it was so much fun. We had a really great time.
That sounds amazing. Did they do the sound system coming in through the radio?
Yeah, through like an FM radio. And, initially I'm like, I'll just play it through the car radio. And they're like, your car battery will die if you do that. Which I didn't think it would, but I suppose depending on how good your car battery is. But then they had like radio rentals, and some people brought their own radios, and we just put the windows down, and we heard there was enough people around us with radios that we didn't even need to have the car on. It was loud enough, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was like very, like an event opposed to just, yeah.
That's awesome. So did you look out? You looked out through the front window?
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
But some people had like SUVs, and they had the back open and lawn chairs, and it started raining when we got there. By the time we had ordered food and such, it had stopped, but like there was kind of that ominous cloud. So I'm like, oh, we can just sit in the car. But yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. So I'm really curious to see how from the sounds of it, they're only doing older movies. They're not doing first run stuff, but I'm curious to see how movies go forward because of COVID and theaters and people not necessarily being keen on sitting 6 inches apart,
Yeah, I haven't done a drive-in recently. I'd love to do that though. I think that'd be so fun. I don't know why, do you specifically know or have any thoughts on why did drive-ins like kind of die out? Is it just because they're like the massive amount of space that you need with the vehicles that's like not cost efficient? Or
I think it was more with the onset of those, Spielberg, Lucas movies. A lot of them, and this I learned from talking with the guys that own the drive-in. There are certain standards required to show those movies, especially Disney movies. You have to have a certain quality of sound. You have to have a certain quality of projector. And that's really hard to do in a drive-in when you're playing through an FM radio or some sort of little speaker. And so I think that was really the thing that kind of pushed them out. And now that they're like, hey, we can, instead of taking a gamble on first run movies, whether it's good or not, we can just play older movies that people love and want to share with their families.
Fun. Yeah.
And so there's not the same requirements, because as a studio, so like everyone knows that movie. It doesn't really matter if they think that the sound is kind of not top notch. They know what the movie is. And so I think there's more freedom that way.
Cool. Yeah, it was funny. So my dad and I had a conversation about with this movie, Hollywood.com, that we just made. We had the conversation about how fun it would be to, and I had some friends that did this, and it worked out really well for them. They so enjoyed it, and like people were excited about the film. But because our movie is like this, like kind of quirky, romancing the stone adventure film, we had discussed about like what a blast it would be to take the film on tour across the United States and like, personally go with the film and play it at these drive-ins. We've got it up on Amazon, but like still do these movie showings, and you get there and you talk about the film and all of that. And so that's something that he and I have like still tossed around for a bit. We're like, that would be like, what a cool experience. Well, how fun would that be? And I had some friends who did that. They had a horror film and they took it across the US, and they had a couple of the actors with them, and it was literally like a band tour, like, and so they, in these different areas too, they would do a little bit of like a pre-show as horror. So they had like, maybe, oh gosh, I forget what that's called. Like where people like do like the double jointed stuff and like,
like a circus sideshow kind of thing.
Yeah, so they would do that before, and then they sold the tickets for more than a traditional movie price, because they had like the actors there, and they had like the circus sideshow and all the stuff. And and then they would do these screenings, and so they sort of like, because it was their film lended to that. It was sort of like a horror culty type film. Yeah. And so Hollywood.com is sort of like its own kind of like quirky ensemble, type film too, where I think it would work well with that, You
should totally come.
Like, yeah, that's what I was thinking. We've been talking about it. We're like, that would be really, really fun. Throw the actors in a van and make it like a whole thing. I also thought it'd be cool too. Like, what a fun documentary if you had somebody film the whole thing.
That would be really interesting. Yeah.
I just don't. You'd have to figure out like, would you or would you not include the drama?
You would have to include the drama. And you could call it something like the Long Con.
The Long Con? Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, you should definitely do that. That'd be awesome. That'd be so cool.
Because like too, with some of the actors, we had great actors in this movie. The actors are so much fun. We've got Tom Arnold, Devin Rattray's in it, Paige Howard's in the movie. But it was funny because like, so when we were filming this movie, like all of the actors are working actors, and they're people that I've worked with in the past in different movies that I've done. And so like for me, for the directing on it, it was really important to me to have great actors and like to have that experience of, building out the character with them and building out the arcs and the narratives and stuff. So anyway, it was funny, but yeah, if you took them on, tour, it'd be quite the experience. We did a couple of, because we filmed all over. We filmed like in Texas, we filmed in Arizona, we filmed in Guatemala, California. And so like when we filmed in Arizona and the Yuma sand dunes, that was fun. But we just drove out there from California. So we loaded, that was already like a little bit of this like, thing. Yeah, because we loaded all of the equipment, we loaded all of the crew, and we loaded some of the cast in the car and just like road tripped out to Yuma. And it was funny. It was really funny. Because when you get that many personalities together, but you're on a time crunch because they're like working actors, so you've got this limited schedule. And so like we have one actor, I won't say who it is. I adore him to death, but he's so funny to be like on a trip with because he eats for an hour. He chews every little bite. And we're like all on a road trip. So we're like, we gotta go. Like,
yeah. TikTok, let's go, man.
Yeah, it was funny because like I think the rest of us were sitting there like, what's going on? He's still like cutting the things. And my dad was like, my dad like handled it. So my dad was so funny. My dad was like, he's like, all right, we've got a 15-minute time limit. And then like your food gets to go. We'll go ahead and order yours in the to-go plate. So you can eat with everybody else when it's already packaged and ready to get on the road. Can't be wasting, because each meal would be an hour.
Yeah.
So like on the road trip, the breakfast, the lunch, and then the dinner.
So you lose 3 hours. Yeah.
Like, like, let's go. It was just funny. But that was funny filming in the Yuma, Arizona sand dunes too, because to get that location, like with the way that I wanted it to look in the movie, which was sort of those like rolling, landscape, or not, it's not landscape, but like the rolling sand hills where they're really pristine.
Mm-hmm.
We had to shoot there in really hot weather. We had to shoot there in like 110 degrees because otherwise people are out there doing off-roading stuff and like all the ATVs. Yeah. So it's funny. We were like out there shooting and like the cameras were overheating and it's right there on the border too. So Border Patrol pulled up and they were like, what do you guys like? What? And we're like, we're just filming. And because a lot of people like would sneak across the border and stuff right there.
Yeah.
So they're like, what? You guys are nutty. like, yeah, we're just out here. We got to get it. Like perfect, pristine sand dunes. I'm like, okay. But we filmed the Border Patrol car. We threw it in the movie. If you watch the movie in there, you can see it.
Oh yeah. Nice. Now you have talked a lot about how you wanted to release it in Mexico and you talked about Guatemala. Like what's the connection? Is your family from that region or?
No, my dad speaks fluent Spanish though.
Okay.
So he speaks fluent Spanish and then he's a gemologist. And so, like to buy like Guatemala has some really awesome jade specimens there. They have all different colors. They have like beautiful black jade. They have some of the imperial jade. They have orange jade, like just my goodness, like all of these different colors. And so the way that part kind of came into the movie, because my dad and I wrote it together. So like the whole Hollywood side of it was more my background since I'd grown up on set and started like acting at 7 and whatnot.
Yeah. And
the Latin America and like the enchanted piece of jade and all of that came from his side of things. And so, and also from a trip that he and I had taken together. So when I first started getting into filmmaking, one of the things that I had decided to do was to film him doing what he does for work, this gemology stuff. And you can actually see some of that online if you go to like YouTube and you plug in Gem, like GEM Hunter, and then the last name BOOREM, it'll pop up. But so we were at the Tucson, Arizona Gem and Mineral Show, which is like, I think it's either the largest in the world or the second largest in the world for these, for buying gems and minerals. And so when we were there, and this is way before we made the movie, this is a while ago, and we were there and no one could get the prices that they wanted for Guatemalan jade. Mm-hmm. There was basically one group that was controlling the prices coming out of Guatemala for this jade. And so the show lasts for about 2 weeks and we were there at the very beginning in Arizona. And so after we talked to a few people and they were expressing, that they weren't getting what they wanted out of it, my dad decided that we should go to Guatemala and then go see, if we could get over there, hunt down jade, and then back to the show because it's what people were wanting. And so I went to Guatemala with him and I filmed the whole thing. I filmed it
while the show is still going on.
Yeah. So the Tucson, Arizona show is going on. And then we go to Guatemala and I'm filming all of this because I'm like, oh, this is cool. And like, I knew I wanted to get into filmmaking. So I like wanted to practice and I had like my shot list each day so that I could cut it all together. And so we got over to Guatemala and we were just like driving all over the place, which was such an experience. A lot of the freeways there are these like 2-lane freeways and they have these huge buses, these huge semis on these 2-lane freeways. Yeah. And so like, so we're just like passing them and weaving around them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is wild. And so finally we found, there was this like village And you can see this footage if you look up that YouTube thing I had mentioned. But we found this village, and they had been selling jade specifically to a guy who just stopped showing up, and he hadn't showed up in like 5 years. And so they just had stacks of jade ready to sell. And so so we bought the jade. We bought 300 pounds of jade, and we brought it back to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show and sold it before the show was out. And so that was a huge inspiration for like the jade, and then also for the enchanted jade and the cursed jade that's in the movie.
Yeah.
When we were back in this village, it was funny. So they had their regular pieces, and as I mentioned before, like the jade until you polish it looks pretty ugly. Like it just looks like river rock. Like most of it's like pretty gray on the outside and whatever. Yeah. But they brought out these other pieces that were like really like gorgeous and polished, and they were smaller. And so we're looking at them and we're like, wow, those are really cool. And anyway, they were trying to sell us stuff from tombs.
Ooh, really?
Yeah, from Mayan tombs. And my dad was like, no, I don't think so. I think we'll pass on that one. Yeah, no Mayan tomb stuff. So yeah, so that was funny. So that like influenced the curse part stuff too. Because I guess from my understanding with the Mayans, a lot of times when they would bury their deceased, they would put a piece of jade in the mouth. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that that helped the soul leave the body, or it was something that helped them into the afterlife, something like that, or some sort of spiritual thing. So, so it's like not just like. So
it's dead people mouth jade.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That like a spirit potentially passed through for something. It's even more wild. They're like, no. Like, I'm sure, if they took it from the tomb and it's like their ancestors and they're from the area, probably not getting cursed, probably, fine by the spirits. You take it across and sell it somewhere. Suddenly that turns into some other world stuff. Like I saw that movie, The Mummy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I saw that movie. That movie was intense. I love that movie. But so that was the inspiration on all of that, which was fun.
So how did you go from acting, which you said you started at 7, to directing? Like, was that something you always wanted to do, or was it just because you had this idea, with your father, and it was more personal that, you wanted to?
No, it's definitely something I always wanted to do. I think it's sort of like a natural progression from acting, especially like when you've been on set for as long as I have since I was little. I mean, it's basically, kind of, like ingrained in my DNA. Yeah. Starting 7's pretty young. So, I was always really curious and asking people questions on set and whatnot, about what they did, their jobs. And so acting, you show up, and you're just there for however many hours, or for your part, and you're a piece of the puzzle, or you're, a paint color in a painting. Yeah. But for directing, you're, the first one there and the last one there at the end of the day. You work with all departments, all different crew members. You have to know what everyone does, have a hand in all of that. You're there from the beginning of the project as it's, unless you buy a script, but, as it's being developed, and then you follow it all the way through, post-production. So, you're involved with the color correction, the sound, the music, all of these things. And so, I just found that to be like really exciting to kind of learn about all those different areas and have a hand in them. So, the only
I'm a bit of a control freak, so that sounds like I'm like, yeah, I like that.
Did you say you're a control freak?
A bit of a control freak, yeah. So just the idea of being like, oh, I get to do everything. Yes, okay.
Yeah, it's fun too. I mean, one of my favorites is just hearing people's interpretations.
Yeah.
Yeah, like on the script, like hearing because especially if you get awesome artists and like wacky artists, mm-hmm. Like some of the stuff that they bring to the table, you're like, what the F? Like, what is that? Where did you come up with that from? And then some of it you use, some of it you're not able to use. But like, it's just fun to hear, these extreme things that artists come up with.
where you wrote the script, was there ever something that someone came up with where you're like, oh, I really like this, but I like mine better. I really want to have whatever my vision was, even though you liked theirs,
I mean,
whether it a improv line or whatever,
I like all of the people that are on this. We got some really awesome people, even like across the board into like the music, the sound design, editing, all of that. There's like some really stellar artists involved. So it's, I pretty much, I had to make sure that things were streamlined with the narrative to make sure that things are like cohesive and match,
Yeah.
But apart from that, like I was like super open because I think that, if you have great artists and they're bringing something to the table, like, that's why I want them there. Like, I'm excited to utilize what they have and can contribute.
Yeah, I think collaborating it's the only art I have done all COVID. I kind of, I don't know, lost that creative drive once quarantine hit. But then I actually got to, similar to you, I got to collaborate with my daughter on some pieces. And it was so much fun. And it was interesting to work with her and not think of her as my daughter, but as an artist.
Oh, that's so fun. That's so
Yeah.
fun. What kind of projects did you guys do?
We were commissioned to do, so I had friends who had bought a house, and here in Massachusetts, it's illegal to sell a house with a pool that has a diving board.
Okay,
So
interesting.
the previous owner had removed the diving board and just kind of stuck it behind the pool house.
Uh-huh.
And I guess they weren't really interested in putting it back up. So they asked us to turn it into a piece of art so they could hang it out in the pool area. And then we were commissioned to do, there was a restaurant down here that had to put up partitions in between the seating, and they were having local artists paint murals on them. So we did that as well.
Awesome. So you guys both paint?
Yeah, I tend to draw more, but it was more, I don't want to say her style because we kind of worked on it together, but it was very graphic, minimalist, kind of like, it wasn't very photorealistic, and the mural was kind of cartoony. So it was a lot of fun, but typically I draw more than paint. But yeah, it was just really fun to work with her and kind of see where her head's at, and talk colors, like what colors would work, and how we're going to do this, and it was just, it was a lot of fun, and kind of in a way made me feel a little old, because you're like, oh, she's got her shit together, she's a smart kid.
She's a full-blown human. Oh no.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
Well-formed thoughts. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
That's so cute. That's great. I mean, you guys will remember that forever. I think
Oh,
that's,
yeah.
that's something really special about working with family. That's cool. You put it in the catalog of like the memory bank.
Did you? So obviously it's different because they're family, but is there any cons to working with your family in such on a project so close?
I don't know. My dad and I had a really good time working on this together. He's like a workaholic and I'm a workaholic too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I guess that could get negative because he and I are both like, should we do the 16-hour day? Let's do a 16-hour day. Let's do it. Should we drive across? Let's do it. Like this film was really funny in itself because, I mean, for an independent film, like we've got a lot of actors, a lot of moving parts, a lot of locations, a lot of animals, like just like a lot, it's like pretty far out for an independent in terms of what we decided to throw into the mix on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is because he and I like don't shy away from, like the extra work that it'll take if something's cool to like throw it in there. So I mean, that being said, like, yeah, I guess like a con on that would be like just like burying our heads in it and we like look up and we're like, oh my gosh, like a few months just go by, like what do we do? All these hours, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? Yeah. So but it's nice, having that like camaraderie on it. I'm trying to think, let me try to think what else. he was funny with some of the dialogue because because his background's not as an actor. He's a gemologist, and so he was funny with some of that because he's like, I wouldn't say that. And I'm like,
Oh, he wanted it to be like real technical, or just that like, oh, we don't use that term or that kind of thing.
no, he's just like, I wouldn't say that line like for his acting.
Oh,
I'm like, okay, well, your character says that. He's like, yeah, but I don't feel like I would say that. And I was like, well, okay, so you gotta say that though, because that's part of the story. It's like, I don't know. I just don't think I'd say that.
just trying to. I'll be my trailer.
It was funny though. And he'd be like, all right, fine, like I'll say it, but just doesn't feel natural for me to say that.
Did he have a theater background, or was he?
No,
Yeah.
no. He, he's a gemologist through and through. So, we just started putting this project together. I had done several short films and some music videos and some experimental work, and then I knew that I wanted to do a full feature. Doing a full feature is like the next progression on it, but then also like the audience that you get a full feature in front of is cool because it's not just more specifically like film connoisseurs or like film buffs like you get with like the short films.
Right.
This is just general audience, people just like wanting to relax, escapism, like see the movie. So that's cool.
And especially something that is, on Amazon. I mean, that just gets you in front of so many other eyes, and God knows I've been, on there just been like, oh, let's give this one a try and see what it's about. And
yeah, for sure. And then we made a music video during the pandemic too, which was pretty cool. My dad and I did that one together. It was fun. For an artist named Travis Tidwell. It's called Catch Me If You Can.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's really good. We got it up on country music television, and then now it's nominated for a Josie Award, which I guess is the largest independent music awards, and that's in September in Tennessee. So I'm hoping everything stays open, everything is good, fingers crossed, because I want to go to that.
Yeah, that's exciting. So you said you've done other music videos. Do you like that kind of shorter storytelling format that a music video is? Because a lot of them, there's some that are just the band, but I feel like most of them have some sort of like short story that they're trying to compress into the video.
Music videos are cool because there's such a short turnaround. So it's rewarding in that sense. It's, you put it together, you shoot it, you get paid, like, you have this cool artistic form. It's shot, you collaborate, and that's awesome, so just the trajectory of that's cool. A feature film's a lot harder.
Yeah.
So, what did you ask me?
Well, I was just wondering if you like that format of that kind of compressed story, where you're trying to tell a story in 3 minutes or so.
I think it's cool. I think that, like the music videos are like tone experiments too, thematic and all of that. But I think it's cool. But you don't get that like the character arc stuff with that you get in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in 3 minutes you can't get that far with it.
Right.
So the
I've just really been like fascinated with music videos lately because I'm a kid that grew up on MTV, and there's really no platform like that's well known that you can go on YouTube and search for a video by a band, and it may give you recommendations, but I think the thing that really made MTV was interesting is you sat down and it's going to show you a wide variety of videos, and I found like you discovered more music that way. And since we had the podcast and talking to so many more musicians, it's always kind of like, well, how do people discover your music without that kind of, radio play is not the same as it used to be, and Spotify and Pandora are kind of like some of the bigger avenues. So I'm always like really fascinated about like the music video and that people still make them. And there's really great ones out there from bands I've never heard of. And so I feel like MTV or something like it is missing.
I know. I don't know why specifically they stopped playing music videos so much. Country music television, they still play a lot of music videos.
Yeah.
But that's such a specific genre. Like what you're saying, MTV was a lot more broad. You were getting like your rock, your alternative, even some folky stuff, like everything across the board.
The thing that I heard, and I don't know how true it is that it was hard for them to get accurate ratings because the nature of the music video is you'd be like, oh, it's Madonna, cool. And then Cyndi Lauper would come on and be like, ugh, I'm not a big Cyndi Lauper fan. And you'd switch channels. And that the Nielsen ratings were based off of like 15-minute chunks. And if you're on for 3 minutes, off for 3 minutes, and on for 4 minutes, you're not really on. So it's hard to get accurate ratings, which therefore makes it hard to sell advertising, yada, yada, yada. And then they come up with some other shows that they have stronger ratings because people don't switch them on and off. And then they were able to sell better or more expensive advertising. So that's what they went with.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot of sense because they went into so many of those
reality shows.
Yeah. But it would be interesting to see what happens with that now, because there are certain streaming platforms that have decided they're not going to release their ratings.
Right. Yeah. Like Netflix. Netflix doesn't tell you how it went. They're just like, you either get renewed or you don't. And that's kind of it.
Yeah. So,
but they're also not driven by ad revenue either. So it's, if you had a 2-hour show that people turned off and on, doesn't matter as long as they stay subscribed.
Right.
You know, so it's a really interesting time for entertainment and media, and especially like that weird combination of the two, like that music video. It's a little bit of, movie making, and it's a little bit of music, and it's just, yeah. I got on this kick where I just started like scouring the internet for some, and I just found some amazing bands that I'd never heard of that have great videos, and I'm like, how have I never heard of this or heard of this person, or this absolutely would have been played on MTV 40 years ago.
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder I wonder how people are discovering new bands. Do you think it's like Spotify like suggested, or?
I think it may be a little bit of Spotify. I think something like YouTube is a little more kind of, it's not as passive, because like I can put Spotify on and I may hear a song and be like, oh, that's kind of a cool song. But if I'm not looking at my phone, if it's on a Bluetooth speaker or I'm busy, where YouTube, I think you're more focused, you're actually looking at it. And so when it pops up, a recommended video or switches to another video, I think that's more likely. I typically ask people on my show, I'm like, who are you listening to? Who should I be listening to? And I ask my kids a lot because they usually have some interesting music choices.
Where are they picking theirs up from? Like TikTok or?
Osmosis through other kids. I have no idea. Like, kids are just weird. They're sponges for information. Like, I don't even know how they get it all. They're not real big on TikTok. They're more like Snapchat. But I feel like TikTok's something that I gotta spend more time with. That it makes me feel super old. So I'm like, I don't understand it. I don't know why you think it's funny. It's just a person lip syncing. I just feel like that's the thing that makes me feel like super old. They're like, get off my lawn, that kind of thing.
Yeah, TikTok's interesting. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, because I feel like it's such like a cultural phenomenon. And I'm not quite tied into what they have going on, but I did have some friends before who were very much into Vine, and they had like followers on Vine, and they had, they were using that as like a platform to produce content and whatnot. And then Vine, from my understanding, like went under because they couldn't figure out how to monetize, kind of like the MTV thing you were talking about, like
Right.
totally monetize via the advertising. And so then they just sort of fizzled out. And these people that I knew, for they when it left, they just left those, like those followers, maybe follow them to other platforms, but like not at the same capacity that they had built up on Vine. So I don't know. It'll be interesting because it feels like somehow TikTok, even though they're both like 30-second video platforms, it seems like TikTok has kind of rooted itself much stronger.
Yeah, and it seems like it is easier to get a following. I don't know if that's true. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but the guy that books our comedy show, he's got like 100,000 followers. Not saying he shouldn't. Sorry, AJ. But it's maybe that's just me, like that weird, like, how does my friend have 100,000 followers? Yeah, so, and it's a very strange platform, and yeah, I just need to spend time with it. I think this is like the 5th podcast in a row where I've asked people, like, well, how do you do TikTok? Yeah, it's just something that I'm curious to see, because I feel like it's also more positive in nature than some of the, Twitter and Facebook, which tends to be kind of a nightmare. And I feel like TikTok is more lighthearted.
Oh, I never thought about it like that. That's true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, and kind of Snapchat in a way too.
yeah. And apparently there's some sort of TikTok pasta that's a thing. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
So,
Have you gotten on Clubhouse?
no. What the hell's that?
It's a new one. It's
Oh my god.
the new boogie.
Come on, you're making me feel even older now. I don't even know what the hell that is.
Yeah, you gotta get on there and claim your name. You know that
Yeah.
name real estate's
Oh, I already did that on TikTok. I'll have to do that on Clubhouse, but yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
whether you use it or not, you need that name real estate.
Yeah.
Clubhouse is, I'm still wrapping my head around it. There's some people who are so like very like diehards, like they feel that this is like the new wavelength that things are going for social media. It's an interesting platform. It's essentially like a radio. Like you go on there and people have these rooms, and there's been all kinds of interesting people on there, like Elon Musk, and whatever. And there are these chat rooms. But by chat, I mean like literally talking. It's like a phone call room. It's a conference call room, but in a forum, kind of like Reddit. And so in these rooms, you can go in and listen in. And usually there's just an allotted amount of people that have approval to speak. And then you can raise your hand to, raise your hand to,
Yeah.
to ask a question.
Huh. That's really
and
interesting.
like the stage for a moment. Yeah.
Huh. That's really. Now I'm definitely gonna have to look into that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I spoke to one person, and he was saying that it's done a lot for him with I don't know. I didn't fully follow, to be honest, because he's like, it's grown my whole business. And I was like, how?
Yeah, and that's one of those, like, someone's like, oh, you need to be on TikTok. You need to be on TikTok. I'm like, I don't understand how Inebri-art as a brand can grow on TikTok, lip syncing to songs, and like, oh, it's more than that. I'm like, okay, I don't understand. So they're like, oh, you just need to spend time on it. And so that the comedian that I mentioned before, AJ, belongs to this group that will shoot TikTok videos that are themselves basically as fake professional wrestlers, kind of the before match trash talk. And then so they'll do it back and forth, and then whoever gets more likes, I guess, wins the match that never happened.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like this non-existent wrestling league that has no wrestling. It's just people trash talking, and based on the likes, they trade belts back and forth. And obviously he's grown his following to 100,000 followers through that and his other stuff. And it's just really interesting to see how creative people can be, and like in new ways. And like I think we saw a lot of that with YouTube, and then YouTube got really commercialized, so it's a lot harder to kind of achieve that same level. But there's still platforms out there that you can become famous and make a living from making silly videos, and 90% of the population still has no idea who you are. It's a really interesting time.
For sure, for sure. I think it's so cool that there's access to there's so many ways to, like, so many different platforms to push art out through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you didn't have in the past. In the past, gosh, dating back to like, even like back to like the 50s and stuff, if you think about, how controlled all of these different platforms were that people push their art out through, whether that be, just magazines or just, like it was, so specific. And now it's like, if you have a voice and you want to get heard and you want to get your stuff out there, like, do it, by all means, certainly can. And, maybe it'll work out where you'll have a following with it, and maybe you won't, but, at least you have the opportunity to really push it through and do it. And I think that that's one of the things right now that's so cool.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And it always makes me think back to the movie that came out late 80s, early 90s with Christian Slater called Pump Up the Volume.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember, so my son was getting older, and I'm like, I want him to see all the movies that I thought was cool. And I'm like, Pump Up the Volume. And I'm like, will make absolutely no sense to him now. Because like, who cares if he's broadcasting? Like, everyone does that. Like that movie makes zero sense nowadays, because just go get a $60 mic and your computer has a camera and go nuts.
Now, I remember that film, but run me through the premise of it again. What was that?
He was kind of this extremely shy kid who's kind of like displaced because his parents moved a lot and he didn't have friends. He moved to this new town, and he had like all this crazy tech that allowed him to broadcast an FM signal. So once a week or whatever his schedule was, he would go live and broadcast, which had a much short range, basically only the surrounding school. And he would, kind of speak his mind and swear. So swearing on FM radio, like, oh my God. And he'd play edgy music, and it became like the whole town started like, the parents and the teachers hated it and the kids loved it. And he kind of became like an anti-hero. And then the FCC got involved, and like, just now I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, if I showed it to my kids, they'd be like, I don't understand why anyone cares that he's doing this.
Oh, but it's so true. Like, everything was so controlled,
Yeah,
everything had to be approved, controlled, very tiny group. Only so many people were able to, whether it be radio or whatever, like, magazines, like, the actors, like if you think about the, like back in like the 50s, they had so many actors, and the actors, a lot of them lived in like actor houses.
Mm-hmm.
Where, and then they were on these studio contracts. So that was like a limited group too. It wasn't, just open
right
to everyone. So
what's the one thing that you're following on social media or watching on YouTube that even you were kind of like, am I really watching this for this amount of time? Like, do you have that one thing? Like, mine was marble racing for a long time.
Marble racing? That sounds
marble racing. It was great. It was fantastic.
I don't know. I find very obscure stuff on YouTube that like there's a, oh my gosh, I forget what the woman's name is, but there's like this British woman, and she has this remodeling show, and she gets hooked up with these like people who decide that they want to remodel these castles in like Scotland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can blank out what it's called, but I've watched so much of it, and it's always funny because the layout of a castle is not it's not, like there was one in particular, like the kitchen was essentially like a dungeon. It was like a basement, it's
Yeah.
like on the bottom and it's like wet and muddy. And like, we generally think of what our kitchens you want. It's sort of like people cook and talk and like they hang out. So you probably have it, I don't know, near the front of the house and like with some chairs,
Bright and sunny. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was like in the bottom, like, where the servants go.
Right.
And so the remodel on that was like funny and like, and it was like 8 floors tall and the ballroom was on like the 6th floor. I'm like, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. And, but yeah, a lot of these like people go through and they remodel these castles, but halfway through, they start to realize that like it's not necessarily the most what's the word that I'm thinking of? I don't like function
like the most conducive to actually living. Yeah.
Yeah, because like the walls on them are like what this thick,
Yeah.
and they're like cold inside and they're like damp and like moldy and like there's no windows. Like
And you're trying to heat it and the rock is just sucking the heat out of the building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also like a lot of these old castles in different places are under historical societies, so they can't, like in the castle that has no windows, they can't just start knocking out stuff and putting windows and all this stuff. Right. So it's funny, like as these shows go on, because I feel like there's like these like very like wealthy people who are like, I've got the castle, we're gonna remodel, and then like halfway through they're like, it's dark in here. Dark, and you're like, well, I don't know. So that I've been watching a lot of those on YouTube. There's also this other series that's very quirky. I forget what this one's called as well, but it's basically like people who have fallen in love with inanimate objects.
Okay.
And like so like there was like a woman who
is it like a comedy or is this an actual
No, it's like a docuseries.
Oh, okay.
It's a docuseries. So there's like a woman who wanted to marry the Eiffel Tower. And they're so sincere. Like these people are very sincere and like, committed about their thoughts and their wants to this stuff. I like weird stuff if you haven't noticed. But yeah, and then there was another woman who she had fallen in love with a it was like a ride at like her like local carnival.
Okay.
Yeah, so she like go and see it and she like touch it and like anyway, so it's just interesting character study, know.
That is fascinating.
Those and more so like I like watching them just because I think it's like fascinating, like the complex of like, not to make fun of the people, just like the complex of like human nature, like because we're so wildly varied in all different directions, and like when people feel I don't know, people are just weird. It's great.
And to be honest, we're all like, I don't know what, 3 or 4 brain cells off of being in that same situation. Like if your chemistry is a little bit different, you'd be like, I love my toaster oven.
Yeah. I mean, let's be real. It heats things up. It's there for me.
It makes pizza. Come on now.
I know where to find it at all times.
Oh man. Well, I want to say thank you for coming on. This was a lot of fun. And, I encourage our listeners to go check out your movie. It's on Amazon and it's Hollywood.con, C-O-N, correct? It
is. Yes. It's about con artists in Hollywood making a movie. Okay. And that's how we got the Hollywood.con.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that they, I feel like when people hear .com, they automatically are going to think it's an M, but.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out, when we were running through the names, we were trying to figure out a name that was like weird and different that no one else had.
Yeah. Of course.
So
and you got to think about like
Hollywood.com. Cars in Hollywood. Hollywood.com. Yeah.
But yeah, I want to say thank you. This is great. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us. And anytime you have, when you're ready with your next film, come back, talk to us.
Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a total blast. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks to our listeners, and we'll see you guys again next week. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. You can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or on Instagram at Inebri-art6. You can email us at Inebri-art@yahoo.com. And make sure you listen to the other podcasts on the Inebri-art Podcast Network, including Bar Talk, Old Colony Cast, Retro Redoctopus, America's Hometown Horror Podcast, and our newest one, Theme Park Legends, a podcast about working at theme parks. What else? And we'll catch you again next time.